Hey guys, Chris here with Work to Game, and the 4.2 live letter just ended. So I am going to try to go through this as fast as possible in the order they talked about it, and we can expect to see quite a bit more down the road. So they opened up with some technical difficulties, that's why it's just now ending. And they also had, normally kind of that second part's a little bit fluff, but they showed us a ton today. So I will just try to keep moving. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. I'll try to keep my opinions to myself, and Brian and I can process this in a later video. So they opened up on a Duty Finder replay, and this is going to be huge, and we're going to go into it a lot later, but that's what they opened up on, and they had this lovely little some costumes on, so very fun, and they basically went into a list of just what is all changing, and then they went back and went into more detail. So I'm going to follow it in the exact same order. We're going to fly through the list. If that's enough for you, you can go ahead and peace out. If you'd like to stay and see a little more, they did show kind of some screenshots and some footage of some things, and so we'll try to dive into that as well. So the patch title will be Rise of the New Sun. It is confirmed for January 30th. That is earlier than Brian's date and earlier than my date, so that's awesome news. That does make sense now that, you know, in the context of hindsight, saying that, you know, they're talking about trying to get more content patches in the 4.0 series than they have in the 3.0 or the 2.0 series. So that makes sense. We are going to, of course, be getting some new main story. We are returning to Doma. That follows the lore. We have a couple of screenshots there that they'd like us to guess on, kind of what's going on. And we will be getting new Hildibrand quests. This is going to be in the 4.25 patch. And so we're thinking that's probably that first Tuesday in March, but that has not been confirmed yet. We'll get that in part 2 of the live letter, which should be in early to mid-January. Don't have a date yet on that that's firm. We have the new beast tribes, the Ananta, just as Brian predicted, so way to go there, buddy. And 2 new dungeons. We have Hell's Lid. We have a couple of screenshots from that. That should be a lot of fun. And then we have a hard mode from a dungeon way back at level 60 content, which is Fractal Continuum. So they did make a joke about that looking like a giant USB drive. It's nice to see kind of a tombstone taking a more active role, if that's what that is. Which does give us Mendacity as our new tomes. So let the jokes begin about, you know, grinding for men or whatever that looks like. We also got told that our new primal will be part of the new series, the Four Lords. So they showed us screenshots from the first one, a white tiger, Byakko. And that means conquering the soul of the white tiger is the literal translation. And we'll have new raids. This is Omega Sigmascape, so we are progressing towards Omega. There will be a savage for this as well. Not real shocking. We'll also be getting an extreme of Byakko. So those are all things that I think we could expect. So far up to this point, it's just a traditional live letter, a traditional content patch. I hate to take it for advantage. I hate to take advantage of it, because we get spoiled here in the Final Fantasy XIV community that we get these huge content patches all the time. So it's easy to be like, oh yeah, it's just another giant amount of content they're giving us. As we move on, we are getting the Forbidden Land of Eureka, Animos. So there will be a lot of new things to do in here. This is not a deep dungeon, but it will have its own separate leveling system. It's content that's supposed to be unlike anything we've seen in 14 so far. You're going to be able to enhance your weapon and your armor to make it stronger, so maybe this is kind of how we get our new relic weapons, just to speculate a little bit there. They've shown us just a little bit of artwork, but no screenshots. So they said just imagine what it's going to look like next. They did say there's going to be job adjustments, but they're mostly going to be focused on those in the next live letter. They know that Black Mage and Warrior will be affected. I can't imagine those are the only two. So I think that they'll save a lot of that as they kind of start to play test the new patches and the new gear levels and get a feel for, you know, exactly what that needs to be. There's also a lot of big PvP changes. There's a new map. They show us a little more of that later. So some changes on the way Feast works, some changes on some rules. If you're a big PvPer, I'll go into that in more detail later on. If not, we'll just keep moving. The biggest thing, in my opinion, that they changed here as far as UI and features, quality of life in the game, is Glamour. I'm not a big Glamour guy, but this is just a giant change. It is a lot like the transmog system out of WoW, a lot like what Brian and I have talked about and you guys here in the community have talked about, where basically you're going to be able to use one Glamour shard for all types, and that you're going to kind of be able to store these things. So they show a little more of what that looks like, but it kind of seems like you absorb these items and then you have a certain number of slots. Speaking of slots, from an inventory management standpoint, they did increase stack size from 99 to 999. So I know you crafters, anything like that out there, that is big news. Even progression raiders, that's just less to deal with. There's also going to be an undo sort, which is kind of a nice, every once in a while you accidentally things, you have them just the way you want them, and then you sort by a certain thing and it shoots them all to different tabs and you can't find where you put stuff. So that's a nice little thing. They did say that was, from a technical standpoint, one of the most complex things they were able to achieve with this patch cycle. Now we come into housing updates. There will be more plots as promised, but there's a big difference here. These will not be all dropped on patch day. They will have some dropped on patch day, and then they will slow release them to avoid this kind of rush where it's like, oh, I had money, I took off work, and because there was a queue for my server, I wasn't able to get a house. So this should kind of dilute that into multiple rushes, I guess, and so hopefully that will kind of make it a little harder for people to get totally blocked out of that content. Depends on how many they add. The also makes sense. Last expansion we were in the air, so we had airships. This expansion we're swimming underwater, so now we have submarines. I think the meme that was going over on Happy Stream at the time was "You don't pay my sub, Marine." So that'll be definitely a lot of fun to dive into. I look forward to seeing how that ties into my house. Do I have like a little like basement thing that portals me there, or how does that work? And honestly, just like Eureka and all this in general, what does this new content look like? Is this just a port of the old systems to the new eye levels, or is this something that's going to be set up in something that it can be a little more longer form? Performance updates for those of you bards out there. This is a big one. There's a whole new UI. They're talking about having the screen lag out. They couldn't get it working on the stream without lag, and so they felt that they would rather just not show it at all, because it's supposed to. They have it functioning. They just had some technical issues where there isn't any lag. So there's going to be controllers and keys, and there's actually 3 new instruments for a total of 4. So that should be something that people can really dive into and spend their time on. I look forward to seeing what kind of comes out of that. Main scenario dungeons will be adjusted. He did apologize for it taking them so long to get to this. They're hoping to make it better for new players to be able to progress through old MSQ with a better experience. Squadron Dungeons will be added, updates to Uznair, so they're really diving in deep on the maps this time around. They are commenting on how new players felt that leveling crafters is too slow, and so they talked a little bit about how they could try to make that faster. And the biggest issue centered on how repetitive it can be. So you know, one of the frustrating things is you do a new recipe and you get a ton of experience, and then every time after that you don't get that much. And so like one of the things I would like to speculate on is I would love to see it have something like a combo, like when you're in combat, so that when you are specifically crafting things over and over and over and over, that you can kind of build back up towards that kind of like first time experience. If they're not going to introduce any form of jump potion or anything like that to get people caught up on crafters, it's going to become an increasingly large task to expect new people to join the ranks of crafters. Since with cross-class skills, you really want to have all of them to be competitive at that higher end level on the market boards and things like that. So that was part 1. Like I said, I'm trying not to speculate on too much of it and toss my opinion here. I really think there's a lot to talk about here, and that's a whole nother video. Not to mention my contractor arrives in just a few minutes, and so as you guys that are watching the videos this week, you may catch some noise, and I'm trying to keep the quality of the video up for you guys. So to get into part 2, we have feast updates. We are going to the Crystal Tower training grounds. This does not have any relationship to the roleplay Crystal Tower from before. This is merely just a kind of acknowledgement of that. So it'll be themed off of that, but it is totally separate. The arena looks awesome. The match length will be dropped from 8 minutes to 6 minutes. So they're really trying to speed this up. And they're trying to speed it up, in my mind, to get more people in it and to get it more competitive. Because as we talk about that, you're going to have things like they're changing the way when you die, you now spawn where you died with temporary invulnerability. Like, I guess if you've been rezzed, we'll have to see exactly what that looks like. So you won't go back to the team landing. They're also doing things like they're changing the medal caps for how much players can hold, and so if you have less than the amount of medals you start with in a PvP match, you'll actually get a buff, and so that keeps people from just pounding your healer into the ground and you not being able to recover, because your healer will actually get to the point that they can just take it. So that'll be really nice. They also removed offensive and defensive supplies. So these are big things. These new caps are going to hopefully help each people play their role a little differently. Medals exceeding the cap will be dropped. So these are big changes, and it'll be interesting to see how this affects it. They're starting to get into ranked team matches. You can only be on one team. The team can be up to 6 people, so you have your 2 alternates, and you have to queue as a group of 4, and we're starting to see this as a way to go into tournaments. They're saying that this will help qualify you for tournaments, things like that. So this is only applicable for Feast. You'll be able to continue to queue for other PvP content, but the ranked is really centered on Feast here. So I'm using these terms interchangeably, but obviously you PvPers out there know there's a huge difference between Feast, especially as we start to talk about possible ranked Feast, and those big front lines and things like that. So they are looking for more feedback. They are looking for there to be balance changes with both in and out of PvP, talking about UI, talking about class balances, but those are all things that are typically saved for part 2, right? Let those, because you don't want the balances to come out too soon anyway. First of all, you're not taking advantage of the most amount of information you can gather. Second of all, people will begin changing the way they play, the way they buy, so things like housing plots, all those things, those are going to have final details launched right up against when they actually happen, sometimes even in the patch notes while the server is already down, to keep people from changing the way they play. We can speculate at things like, so far with this Glamour system that I'm about to talk about, that things like dyes will increase in price. These are reasonable guesses, but they are just guesses. They talked about PvP for a very long time. They talked about Glamour for a very long time. This was an incredibly long live letter to be packed with information from the start to the end. Usually in my mind, there's part of the live letter that you can almost ignore if you're just trying to get what's changing as far as playable content. They talked about a ton here. So with having a late start with their technical issues, I think they were very frustrated at kind of how fast they were kind of pushed into communicating their ideas, because a lot of the changes they're making are very big and they were struggling to get those through translation. And the contractor's here, so I'll try to keep the noise quick, and I'm moving right along. The Glamour systems are a huge update. They went over this transmog, they showed it. The 200 slots alone is huge. Hopefully these are kind of things that you're absorbing. They are also allowing you to create Glamour ensembles, right? And so there's a little bit of a question exactly how that's going to tie into gear sets, but they say things like if you have a piece of gear that's glamored, dyes are separate from that. So dyes are tied to the ensemble, not the gear. So if I have a hat that I wear on my red mage and my black mage, then that hat could be different colors for each. So hopefully that helps make sense. It will cost a single Glamour prism. We're dropping to 1 type of Glamour prism. You can retain up to 200 unique glamours, so it's no longer used quite as equipment. The new system will be accessible outside in rooms in a future update, so hopefully that's 4.2, if not 4.25. I don't know exactly when this system will roll out. It's big. It's a massive change to the UI and the way we handle inventory and Glamour today. Applying ensembles will not consume Glamour prisms, so it seems like you're just learning these, like learning recipes, and then you're applying them. So this is a lot closer to cosmetic systems as they exist in other games. They are giving you 10 ensembles for now, and so they're saying that you're gonna be able to categorize those to your liking. And so I don't know if you're gonna be able to increase that number as you go. Is that something that's a paid feature? Because it really is totally cosmetic. So if they put those like adding additional retainers or something like that. That's a very reasonable thing to consider for kind of a microtransaction in my mind, as far as something that won't affect gameplay. People do have access to it. It's totally optional. 10 is more than enough. Most people don't play 10 jobs. You know, 10 different ways. Most people aren't playing more than 2 or 3 jobs. So I think 10 is more than fair. They aren't sure if you're going to want to be able to categorize them by jobs or by situation or by where you are. So it'd be interesting if you could set a glamour for when I'm in town so it automatically changed these things. I don't know what the level of power they're looking at putting in there. They already were getting feedback in their chat that 10 is too little. They were getting feedback earlier on class balance suggestions, and they were actually acknowledging that they see these and are reading them and are taking note. So they are already looking for that feedback. They said, don't worry about your current glamour. When the system gets implemented, the data will still be there, so your glamour will not be converted back to default. So how this interacts and how this is implemented is something we'll have to see, but it sounds like they are really trying to think it through so that it is very, very fair and very easy to use. Because my question is, if I change my gear set, does it change my ensemble? If I change my ensemble, does it mess with my gear set? What happens? How I update these? Is it as simple as just applying? You know, and what does that look like? Honestly, for me, like when you talk about jumping platforms, is that totally reset? Because gear sets are, macros are. So I would assume that this is tied to your platform, but I could be wrong. Then they went into the duty recorder, and this is big. This is big for content creators. This is big for progression raters, and they spent a lot longer talking about this than I thought they would. Basically, you can have up to 3 saved. It's going to do it kind of like a Street Fighter save in that it's really just watching key presses, so it keeps the file size pretty small. Now, that's very clever from a technical standpoint, but understanding that is important when understanding why the features will be laid out like they are. Like why there can't be a slow-mo, because it's tied to the global cooldown, and so there's a packet thing there, so you can't necessarily zoom in and see exactly that second. It's going to kind of save these as frames when people were pushing certain keys. But this is going to allow you to see content creators put out guides where they look at the tank's perspective, at the healer's perspective, at the boss's perspective, at a turret's perspective. You can zoom to anything, but you can only have 3 saved. You must be a complete pre-made and have the consent of everybody. Everybody must select yes on the ready check. There is a whole list of things in there. It's actually going to drop everybody's names and turn them into just their class names, so that if these replays ever get used, we're not focused on inappropriate class names, or we're not focused on calling somebody out. Hey, I saw you in that one video. You're awful. You're crap. So they're trying to protect the integrity of the game, and this is there to increase progression, increase guides, bring the level of play across the board up so that it's easier for content creators to say, I'm just going to play the content and then I'll go back and we'll review how my raid did, or we'll review how I'm going to make a guide out of this. So it's something I look forward to. It is a bummer that you have to have a full pre-made. I understand it, and I actually agree with it, but I will say, just from the standpoint of guides, Brian and I always try to put up our guides very quickly. Well, one of the problems with that is that patches go live before work, and so Brian and I will get up that morning and play. Now we kind of have to find people that can hop on and play with us and slam their face into the wall with us. So thankfully it is an MMO, so we should be getting into that. Inventory updates. They did show stacks of $9.99, but they also showed Chocobo saddlebags. This is big. This will not have the ability to be used for crafting or list from. This is merely item storage. So I would think this is where you go put like gear you're saving for another class, or extra tackle, you know, bait, things like that. You're not really able to use it from there. I don't know if you'll be able to access it from like a companion screen, or if you'll actually have to have your mount out, because that would even further restrict it. But I think it's a good thing. I think more inventory is a good thing. So it's up to 70 additional items. That will be nice, and so I think that is it. This has already been a very long video, and I feel like I'm talking as fast as I can, reading as fast as I can, and I'm leaving as much of my opinion out as I can. So Rise of the New Sun is confirmed for January release, late January, which kind of puts us at January 30th. And we know 4.25, some of these things will be set for that. They're saying Hildibrand will always be on the 5s now, which will kind of offset, you know, the big story and the less story. So, you know, some of this I expect to be pushed to 4.25. and some of it may be partially rolled out. We may get parts of the Glamour system as early as 4.2 and then get more added onto it at 4.25. And so I would maybe expect that like the first Tuesday of March. It kind of seems like an appropriate time period to process 2 dungeons, a new primal and all of that, and start to dive into really rounding out Stormblood and really making it back into being a full expansion. This is not new, this is not surprising, but it is comforting. Lately we've been let down by a lot of games, and so to have this game deliver exactly as expected and actually toss a few surprises in there to be surprised and delighted by is a wonderful thing. So with that, my name is Chris with Work to Game. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. I am going to try to get this uploaded as fast as possible, and then hopefully Brian and I will be able to respond. We've both been sick this week, so definitely go out there and let us know kind of what your thoughts are and what you're kind of speculating as where the details around this might fall. And I hope you guys have a great day. I'll talk to you next time.
Hey, it's me. Thanks so much for watching this video. You should click over here to see more videos just like it, or you should click down here to check out our recent vlog. But you can also click somewhere down here below to hit the subscribe button, as well as check out our other info. Again, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.